Velthos Kiron had studied war for 300 years, but he had never truly understood it until the day he watched humans charge into battle against impossible odds. He was a Velthani, a member of a species that had evolved past violence long ago, and his people served as the official archivists of the Galactic Collective, recording the rise and fall of civilizations across 1,000 star systems. And Velthos had documented dozens of conflicts between spacefaring races, always from a safe distance, always with the cold detachment of a scholar observing insects. The humans were supposed to be a minor species, barely worth noting in the grand records of galactic history, and they had been granted a small sector of space near the outer rim, expected to quietly expand their territory and eventually collapse under the weight of their own aggression, like so many young civilizations before them. The Galactic Collective had dismissed them as primitives with dangerous potential. Toys. Emotional creatures who let their feelings override their logic. And Velthos had shared this view for decades, reading reports about human behavior with a mixture of curiosity and mild disgust. Then the Kreth Dominion attacked New Haven. The Kreth were insectoid conquerors who had consumed 17 civilizations in their relentless expansion across the galaxy, and they operated with brutal efficiency, striking fast and hard, crushing resistance before it could organize, and they had expected the humans to react like every other species they had conquered. They had expected fear and submission and desperate attempts at negotiation. Instead, within 72 hours of the attack, the humans had assembled a war fleet. Velthos received permission to observe the human response, and his superiors granted his request with barely concealed amusement, warning him that watching humans die would be unpleasant but instructive for the historical record. And they expected him to document another failed resistance against the Kreth war machine. He boarded a neutral shuttle and traveled to the rendezvous point where the human fleet was gathering, and what he found there surprised him immediately. The human carrier Enduring Light hung in space like a wounded predator, its hull scarred from previous battles, its weapons arrays bristling with barely contained violets, and around it, 46 other vessels of varying sizes formed into precise formations. Velthos had expected chaos and desperation, but he found calm determination instead. Admiral Grace Holloway welcomed him aboard the Enduring Light with a firm handshake and direct eye contact that made Velthos uncomfortable in ways he could not explain. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. She assigned Lieutenant Daniel Reyes to serve as his liaison. Officer with dark hair and an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes, and Reyes showed him to his quarters and explained the basic layout of the ship. The quarters were small but clean, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, and Velthos noticed immediately that humans decorated their spaces with personal items, photographs, and small objects that seemed to have no practical purpose. He asked Reyes about this, and the lieutenant picked up a photograph from his own pocket, showing a family gathered around a table covered with food. "My parents and my sisters," Reyes said. "This is from last year, our family reunion, and I keep it with me to remember why I fight." Velthos did not understand this answer, but he filed it away for later consideration. Over the next 2 days, he observed the humans preparing for battle, and what he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about this species. They did not hide their fear. Members weeping in corridors, embracing each other, writing messages to loved ones they might never see again. But their fear did not paralyze them. Instead, it seemed to fuel them. Chief Engineer Kyle Bennett worked 40 hours without sleep to squeeze extra power from the ship's engines. And when Velthos asked him why he pushed himself so hard, Bennett simply said, "Because every extra % of speed might save someone's life." Medical Officer Dr. Laura Graham quietly tripled her supply of burn treatment materials, organizing her medical bay with grim efficiency. And she smiled at Velthos when she caught him watching her work. "You're wondering why I'm preparing for so many casualties instead of hoping for the best," she said. And Velthos nodded. "Hope is good," Graham replied, "but preparation is better. And I'd rather have supplies I don't need than need supplies I don't have." Petty Officer Maria Santos spent her off-duty hours in the ship's small chapel, a room Velthos had not expected to find on a warship. And when he asked her about it, she explained that her brother had died on New Haven. "He was a teacher," she said softly. "He taught children how to read, and the Kreth killed him along with his entire class, 32 children who never had a chance to grow up." Her eyes were dry, but Velthos could see something burning behind them, something that made him take an involuntary step backward. "I'm not fighting for revenge," Santos continued. "I'm fighting so no other sister has to get that message, so no other children have to die because some species decided they were in the way." Velthos attended the pre-battle briefing on the third day, standing at the back of the room as Admiral Holloway outlined the attack strategy. And what he heard made his blood run cold. The human fleet would jump directly into the heart of the Kreth formation, accepting massive casualties in the opening seconds to close the distance and engage at point-blank range where human weapons were most effective. "We will lose ships," Holloway said, her voice steady and calm. "We will lose friends, and some of us will not survive this day, but the Kreth will learn that attacking human worlds has a price, and that price will be paid in full." The room was silent, and Velthos expected someone to object, to point out that this plan was essentially suicide, but no one spoke against it. Instead, the officers nodded and began discussing tactical details, with the same calm focus they might use to plan a training exercise. After the briefing, Velthos pulled Lieutenant Reyes aside. "This plan is madness," he said. "Your fleet is outnumbered 3-1, and you intend to charge directly into their guns, and our projections suggest you will lose at least half your ships in the first minute." Reyes nodded slowly. "Probably more than half." "Then why?" Velthos demanded. "Why throw away so many lives in a battle you cannot win?" Reyes was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "With respect, Archivist, I don't think you understand how humans fight, and I don't think you understand why we fight." He gestured toward the viewport, where the fleet hung in formation against the stars. "Every person on every one of those ships knows what we're facing, and they know the odds, and they came anyway, not because they think they'll survive, but because not coming was unacceptable." Reyes turned to face Velthos directly. "The Kreth need to learn something today," he said. "They need to learn that there are some species you don't attack, some worlds you don't touch, some lines you don't cross, and they need to learn it in a way they'll never forget." He smiled, and this time the expression reached his eyes, filling them with something fierce and bright. "We're not fighting to win, Archivist. We're fighting to teach, and the lesson we're about to deliver will echo across this galaxy for 1,000 years." Velthos stood alone at the viewport long after Reyes had left, watching the human fleet prepare for war, and for the first time in his 3 centuries of studying conflict, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid. The hours before the jump were the longest of Velthos Kieran's life, and he spent them wandering the corridors of the enduring light, watching humans prepare to die. He had expected panic or despair, or the kind of frantic denial that gripped most species when facing certain death. But what he found instead was something far more unsettling. He found peace. Crew members went about their duties with calm efficiency, checking weapons systems, running diagnostic tests, ensuring that every piece of equipment was functioning at peak performance. And they talked to each other in low voices, sharing memories and making promises. In the mess hall, Velthos watched a group of young officers eating what might be their last meal together, and they were laughing, telling jokes, teasing each other about old mistakes and embarrassing moments. One of them, a woman with short red hair named Ensign Katie Marshall, noticed Velthos watching and waved him over to their table. "You look lost, archivist," she said with a warm smile. "Come sit with us." Velthos hesitated, then accepted the invitation, and he found himself surrounded by humans who treated him like an old friend rather than an alien observer. "First time watching humans go to war?" asked a young man named Ensign Derek Coleman, and Velthos nodded. "It won't be what you expect," Coleman said. "People think we're reckless or crazy, but that's not it at all." "Then what is it?" Velthos asked. The table fell quiet, and the young officers exchanged glances before Marshall spoke. "We're scared," she admitted. "Every single one of us is terrified, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. But fear isn't the same as cowardice, and being afraid doesn't mean you run away." She picked up her glass and studied the liquid inside. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old wars on Earth," she continued. "She said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway." Coleman nodded in agreement. "The Kreth think fear will make us weak, that we'll scatter and run when we see how badly we're outnumbered. But they don't understand us at all." "What don't they understand?" Velthos pressed. "That fear makes us angry," Coleman replied. "That the more scared we are, the harder we fight. Because we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for everyone back home who's counting on us." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's communication system. Admiral Holloway's voice, calm and clear. "All hands, this is the Admiral. We jump in 6 hours, and I want everyone to get some rest before then. Eat something, write your letters, say your prayers if that's your way, and know that whatever happens tomorrow, I am proud to serve alongside every one of you." The mess hall fell silent as the announcement ended. Humans around him absorbed the words. Some bowed their heads in quiet reflection. Others reached out to clasp the hands of friends nearby, and a few wiped tears from their eyes without shame. Lieutenant Reyes found Velthos an hour later in the observation deck, staring out at the assembled fleet. "Can't sleep?" Reyes asked, joining him at the viewport. "My species requires less rest than yours," Velthos replied. "But no, I don't think I could sleep even if I needed to." Reyes nodded. "It's always like this before a big battle. The waiting is the hardest part. Once the shooting starts, you don't have time to think. You just act." They stood in silence for a while, watching the running lights of nearby ships blink against the darkness. "May I ask you something personal?" Velthos finally said. "Go ahead." "Are you afraid to die?" Reyes considered the question carefully before answering. "Yes and no," he said. "I'm afraid of dying. Badly. Of dying without meaning. Of being killed before I can make a difference. But dying itself, that doesn't scare me as much as failing the people I care about." He pulled out the photograph of his family again, the one he had shown Velthos earlier. "My youngest sister just had a baby," he said. "A little girl named Sophie, and I've never even met her in person, just seen pictures and video calls." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I'm fighting so that Sophie can grow up in a galaxy where humans don't have to be afraid, where no one attacks our worlds because they know the cost is too high. And if I die tomorrow, I'll die knowing I helped build that future for her." Velthos struggled to comprehend this way of thinking, and his species had long ago abandoned the concept of personal sacrifice for the greater good, viewing it as primitive and inefficient. Would it not be better to survive and protect her directly, he asked. One person can only protect so much, but a lesson, a message, that can protect everyone. And that's what we're doing tomorrow. We're sending a message that will outlive all of us. The jump alarm sounded 3 hours earlier than scheduled, and Velthos felt his heart's race as the ship lurched into sudden activity. Admiral Holloway's voice cut through the chaos. All hands to battle stations. Kreth advanced scouts have detected our position. We jump now. Velthos made his way to the observation deck, where Lieutenant Reyes had arranged for him to watch the battle from relative safety, and he arrived just as the fleet completed final preparations. The energy in the ship was electric, transformed from quiet tension to focused intensity, and Velthos could hear crew members calling out status reports, their voices sharp and professional. Admiral Holloway appeared on the main view screen, her face calm, but her eyes burning with determination. "This is it," said, "in a few minutes, we'll be in the fight of our lives, and I won't lie to you. Some of us won't make it home. But I want you all to know something." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "The Kreth have been conquering the weak for centuries, and they've grown fat and lazy on easy victories, and they think they know what war looks like." Her expression hardened. "They don't know what humans look like when we're protecting our own. They don't know what it means to face an enemy who would rather die than surrender. And after today, they'll never forget." She took a deep breath. "All ships, prepare to jump on my mark. Good luck, and give them hell." The countdown began, and Velthos gripped the railing of the observation deck as the ship hummed with building energy. Around him, human crew members stood at their stations, with steady hands and determined faces, and he saw no hesitation, no doubt, the terrible focus of beings who had made their peace with death. "Jump in 10 seconds, came the announcement. Velthos watched Lieutenant Reyes take his position at the tactical station, and the young officer caught his eye and nodded once. A silent farewell between two beings who had become something like friends in the brief time they had known each other. 5 seconds. The fleet hummed in unison, 47 ships preparing to leap into the jaws of death. 3, 2, 1, jump. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the enduring light hurled itself across space toward the waiting enemy. Velthos Kiron had witnessed many things in his long life, but nothing had prepared him for what came next. The universe turned to fire in an instant, and Velthos Kiron found himself witnessing something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his very long life. The human fleet emerged from the jump directly in the center of the Kreth formation, exactly as Admiral Holloway had planned, and the Kreth warships surrounded them like a swarm of angry insects. Over 130 vessels, bristling with weapons, and filled with warriors who had never known defeat. The first human ship died within 4 seconds. The destroyer Swift Current took a direct hit from a Kreth energy lance, the beam punching through its shields and hull like a hot knife through soft flesh, and the ship broke apart in a silent explosion that scattered debris across kilometers of space. Velthos watched escape pods launch from the dying vessel, tiny sparks of life fleeing the destruction, and he felt his heart clench with horror. But the humans did not scatter. They accelerated. The enduring light surged forward with a roar of engines that Velthos could feel through the deck plates. And around it, the surviving human ships formed into attack wedges, driving into the Kreth formation like spears thrust into the body of a great beast. Weapons fire filled the void between ships, beams of light and trails of missiles, crossing and recrossing in a deadly dance, and Velthos found himself unable to look away from the carnage unfolding before him. A Kreth cruiser exploded as human missiles found its reactor core, and its death throes sent shrapnel tearing into nearby vessels, and the humans pressed their advantage immediately, pouring fire into the wounded ships. "Concentrate fire on the damaged targets," Admiral Holloway commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos with impossible calm. "Don't let them recover." The tactical display showed the battle in abstract terms, colored dots representing ships, lines, showing weapon trajectories. But the reality visible through the viewport was far more visceral. Velthos watched the human frigate Autumn Wind take hit after hit, its shields failing, its hull breaching, fire visible through gaping wounds in its armor. And he expected the ship to try to disengage, to flee and save what crew it could. Instead, Commander Lisa Perry's voice came over the communication channel, steady and clear, despite the alarms screaming in the background. Autumn wind to all ships. We've lost main engines and weapons are offline. Initiating ramming procedure. It's been an honor serving with you all. The frigate turned toward a Kreth cruiser 3 times its size, and its emergency thrusters fired at maximum power, driving the wounded ship directly at the enemy. The Kreth vessel tried to evade, but it was too slow, too surprised by the suicidal tactic, and the autumn wind struck it amidships at full speed. Annihilation that left Velthos trembling. He had seen ships destroyed before, but he had never seen a crew choose death rather than surrender. Never witnessed beings deliberately sacrifice themselves to take enemies with them. And the autumn wind was not alone in this choice. Throughout the battle, human ships that took critical damage turned toward enemy vessels rather than away, and their crews rode their dying ships into the heart of the Kreth formation, converting military defeats into mutual destruction. Lieutenant Reyes stood at his station near Velthos, coordinating targeting solutions and damage control teams, and his hands flew across his console with practiced efficiency. "How can you be so calm?" Velthos demanded, shouting to be heard over the noise of battle. "I'm not calm," Reyes replied without looking away from his work. "I'm focused. There's a difference." The ship shuddered as a Kreth weapon struck their shields, and Velthos grabbed the railing to keep from falling. "Shields at 60%, someone called out, compensating. Admiral Holloway stood at the center of the bridge, watching the tactical display with narrowed eyes, and she issued orders in a steady stream, her voice never wavering despite the chaos around her. "Task Force Bravo, execute flanking maneuver. Task Force Charlie, provide covering fire, and someone get me a status on the Morning Star." The response came immediately, grim but professional. "Morning Star is gone, Admiral. Direct hit to the bridge." Holloway's jaw tightened, but she did not pause. "Understood. Reassign their targets to the Steadfast." Velthos watched her and marveled at her composure, and he realized that this was what human leaders looked like in crisis. Not immune to grief, but refusing to let it interfere with duty. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though the tactical clock showed barely 90 minutes had passed. Fleet was being torn apart. 29 ships destroyed, thousands of lives lost, the enduring light itself bleeding atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. But the Kreth were suffering even worse. Their formation had collapsed under the relentless human assault. Their ships scattered and disorganized, their commanders clearly unprepared for enemies who refused to behave like prey. 68 Kreth vessels had been destroyed, including 2 of their command carriers, and the remaining ships were pulling back, trying to regroup. Admiral Holloway saw the opportunity and seized it. "All ships press the attack. Don't let them recover." The surviving human vessels surged forward one more time, driving into the retreating Kreth with renewed fury, and Velthos watched as the organized withdrawal became a full retreat. The Kreth fled, their remaining ships scattering in all directions, abandoning the system they had fought to claim. Admiral Holloway waited until the last enemy vessel had jumped away before she allowed herself to sag slightly against her command chair. "All vessels, secure from battle stations," she announced, her voice finally showing traces of exhaustion. "Search and rescue operations begin immediately. We don't leave our people behind." The bridge erupted into controlled activity as crew members began coordinating the recovery of survivors from destroyed ships. Velthos stood frozen at the observation deck, staring at the debris field that stretched across the viewport. Fragments of ships and bodies and dreams floating in the cold vacuum. Lieutenant Reyes appeared beside him, his uniform torn and stained with blood from a cut on his forehead. "We won," Reyes said quietly, and his voice held no triumph, only a profound weariness. "Did you?" Velthos asked, unable to look away from the destruction. Reyes followed his gaze and nodded slowly. We did what we came to do. The Kreth will remember this day, and so will everyone else who hears about it. He put a hand on Velthos's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that surprised the Velthani. Welcome to human warfare, Archivist. I hope you got what you came for. Velthos had come seeking understanding, but what he had found was something far more complex and troubling. He had witnessed humans at their most terrible and their most magnificent, seen them commit acts of suicidal courage that defied all logic, watched them sacrifice everything for something they could not touch or hold, and he was beginning to realize that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make sense of what he had seen. The aftermath of battle was worse than the battle itself, and Velthos Kiron discovered this truth in the hours that followed the Kreth retreat. He had expected the humans to collapse into exhaustion or grief, to withdraw into themselves and process the trauma they had endured. But instead they threw themselves into action with even greater intensity than they had shown during the fighting. Search and rescue teams launched immediately, small shuttles and emergency pods fanning out across the debris field to find survivors, and Velthos watched them work with a mixture of admiration and horror. The rescue crews ignored their own injuries and fatigue, pushing themselves past limits that should have been impossible, and they refused to give up on anyone until they had confirmation of death. Lieutenant Reyes had joined one of the rescue teams despite the cut on his forehead that still bled sluggishly, and Velthos found himself alone on the observation deck. The grim work unfold. Dr. Laura Graham's medical bay had become a scene of controlled chaos. Every bed filled, every surface covered with wounded crew members, and Graham herself moved through the carnage with calm efficiency. Velthos offered to help, surprising himself with the impulse, and Graham accepted without hesitation. "Hold this," she said, pressing a bandage into his hands. "Keep pressure on it while I prep for surgery." Velthos did as instructed, finding himself face to face with a young human whose abdomen had been torn open by shrapnel, and the man's eyes were glassy with pain, but he managed a weak smile. "Thanks," the wounded human whispered. "What's your name?" "Velthos Kiron. I am an archivist with the Galactic Collective." The man tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. "An alien helping patch me up? That's something to tell the grandkids." Graham returned and took over, her skilled hands moving with practiced precision, and Velthos stepped back to give her room to work. He spent the next several hours assisting in whatever way he could, carrying supplies, holding equipment, providing comfort to those who needed it, and he found himself changed by the experience in ways he could not fully articulate. The humans thanked him for his help, treating him as one of their own, despite his alien nature, and their acceptance touched something deep within him. As the immediate crisis began to subside, Velthos went looking for Admiral Holloway. He found her in her quarters, standing at the viewport and staring out at the debris field that marked their victory. And she looked older than she had before the battle, as if the weight of command had aged her years in a single day. "Archivist," she acknowledged without turning. "I heard you helped in the medical bay." "I did what I could," Velthos replied. "It was not much." "It was something," Holloway said, and she finally turned to him. "Face him. That matters." They stood in silence for a moment, two beings from vastly different species sharing a moment of quiet reflection. 29 ships, Holloway said softly. "Over 8,000 dead, and thousands more wounded. The enduring light herself is barely holding together." Her voice cracked slightly. "Those were my people, Archivist. I sent them to die." "They chose to follow," Velthos said, surprising himself with the words. "I spoke with many of them before the battle, and they knew what they were facing, and they came anyway." Holloway nodded slowly. "That's what makes it harder, not easier. They trusted me to spend their lives wisely, and I have to live with the weight of that trust." She crossed to her desk and picked up a photograph, the same one Velthos had noticed when he first came aboard. showing a young woman in graduation robes. "My daughter," Holloway said. "Her name is Emma, and she's studying medicine on Earth. Wants to help people. Save lives." She set the photo down with gentle care. "She begged me not to take this mission. Said she had a bad feeling about it. And I told her that some things are more important than any single life, even mine." Holloway met Velthos's eyes, and he saw something fierce burning behind her exhaustion. "I didn't fight today for revenge, Archivist. I didn't fight because I hate the Kreth, or because I wanted glory. I fought so that Emma and everyone like her can live in a galaxy where humanity is respected rather than preyed upon." She sat down heavily in her chair. "Every species in this galaxy knows the Kreth now, knows what they do to worlds they conquer, and before today, humans were just another potential target, another meal waiting to be consumed." Her voice hardened. "After today, they'll think twice. They'll remember what it cost them to attack New Haven, and they'll wonder if any human world is worth that price." Considered her words carefully. "You believe this battle will prevent future attacks?" "Second, I believe it will make them more costly," Holloway replied. "And that's the best we can hope for, because the universe isn't kind, Archivist. It doesn't protect the innocent or punish the guilty. It just is." She leaned back in her chair. "Humans learned a long time ago that the only protection we have is what we build for ourselves. The only safety we have is what we fight for. And today we told the galaxy that fighting us costs more than it gains." End of P. Lieutenant Reyes appeared in the doorway, his wound now properly bandaged. "Admiral, we've completed search and rescue operations. Final count is 312 survivors recovered from destroyed vessels." Holloway closed her eyes briefly. 312 out of how many? Estimated crew complement of destroyed ships was approximately 7,000, Reyes said quietly. "P." The number hung in the air like a physical weight. Holloway nodded slowly. "Make sure every survivor receives proper care, and begin preparing casualty notifications. I want families informed before the news spreads through other channels." "Yes, Admiral," Reyes said, and he hesitated before adding, "For what it's worth, we gave them hell." "We did," Holloway agreed, "but that doesn't make the cost any easier to bear." Reyes departed, and Holloway returned her attention to Velthos. "You came here to observe and document," she said. "What have you learned?" Velthos thought about everything he had witnessed, the fear and the courage, the grief and the determination, the terrible beauty of humans fighting for something larger than themselves. "I have learned that I understand very little," he admitted. "My species abandoned violence because we found it inefficient and cruel, and we believed that any species that still practiced war was simply primitive and unenlightened." Paused, searching for the right words. "But watching your people today, I saw something I did not expect. I saw beings who hated what they were doing, but did it anyway, because they believed it was necessary. I saw sacrifice that defied all logic, and I saw love expressed through violence." He shook his head slowly. "I do not know if what I witnessed was noble or terrible. Perhaps it was both." Holloway smiled wearily. "Welcome to the human condition, Archivist. We've been asking ourselves that same question for thousands of years." Velthos Kirin returned to the Galactic Collective 3 weeks after the battle, carrying memories that weighed more heavily than any data he had ever collected. And he found himself standing before the assembled representatives of 47 spacefaring civilizations in the Great Hall of Records. The chamber was vast and circular, designed to accommodate beings of every shape and size, and the representatives watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to boredom to carefully concealed fear. He had prepared a formal report, pages of statistics and tactical analysis. But as he stood at the podium, he found himself setting the documents aside. "I have studied war for 300 years, he began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I have observed the Kreth consume 17 civilizations, watched the Morvani Empire crush dissent with casual brutality, documented the cold efficiency of the Synthari war machines. Across the assembled representatives, none of them frightened me the way humans frighten me. A murmur rippled through the chamber, and Velthos waited for it to subside before continuing. The Crest fight because they are hungry. Their biology drives them to consume and expand, and they cannot conceive of any other way to exist. The Morvani fight because they desire power. Their culture values dominance above all else. And the Synthari fight because they are programmed to. Their artificial minds follow directives without question. He gripped the podium with both hands, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. But humans fight for something entirely different. They fight because they care, because they love, because they cannot bear to see those they cherish threatened or harmed. He described the battle in detail, the suicidal tactics, the impossible courage, the ships that chose mutual destruction rather than surrender. And he watched the faces of the assembled representatives shift from skepticism to disbelief to something approaching awe. I watched a frigate captain drive her dying ship into an enemy cruiser 3 times its size, Velthos said. I watched crew members volunteer for missions they knew would kill them. I watched medical personnel work until they collapsed from exhaustion, refusing to stop as long as there was someone left to save. He shook his head slowly, and I watched them mourn afterward, weep for the dead, hold each other in grief, because they are not monsters or machines. They are beings who feel pain as keenly as any of us. The chamber had fallen completely silent. You can negotiate with hunger, Velthos continued. You can satisfy ambition. You can reprogram a machine, but you cannot make a human stop caring. You cannot threaten them into submission. You cannot frighten them into surrender. His voice rose, carrying to every corner of the vast hall. You hurt them. The harder they fight, the more you take from them, the more determined they become to take it back. Because they are not fighting for territory or resources or abstract concepts of honor. They are fighting for each other. He thought of Lieutenant Reyes showing him the photograph of his family, of Petty Officer Santos talking about her brother, the teacher, of Admiral Holloway staring at the picture of her daughter. The Kreth learned this lesson at the cost of 68 warships and tens of thousands of lives, Velthos said. And I suspect the lesson will spread. Word will travel, stories will be told, and every empire that has built its power on the conquest of weaker species must now ask itself a simple question. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. Is what we might gain from attacking humans worth what we will certainly lose? Notes, preparing to step down from the podium. For my part, he added, I intend to recommend that the Galactic Collective extend humanity a full partnership invitation, not because I believe they are peaceful, they are not, but because I believe that any species willing to sacrifice so much for those they love deserves to stand among us. He paused at the edge of the podium. And because, frankly, I would rather have them as allies than enemies. The chamber erupted into debate as Velthos stepped down, voices rising in argument and discussion, but he paid little attention to the noise. He had delivered his testimony, and now the collective would deliberate, probably for years, before reaching any decision. That was their way. But Velthos had already made his own choice. He submitted a formal request for a permanent posting to human space, the first such request ever filed by a Velthani. And when his superiors asked him why, he struggled to. I want to understand them, he finally said. I want to know why they laugh so easily and cry so openly. Why they name their ships after concepts like enduring light and autumn wind. Why they build gardens on warships and sing songs after battles. He thought of the memorial service he had attended before leaving the enduring light. watching humans gather to honor their dead with tears and music and shared memories. They confuse me and frighten me and inspire me in equal measure, he admitted. And I believe that understanding them may be the most important work I ever do. His request was granted, reluctantly, and Velthos returned to human space 6 months later as the first official Velthani ambassador to the species that had made the cosmos tremble. He was assigned to Earth itself, to a city called New York that humans had built on the edge of a great ocean, and he spent his days walking among them, talking with them. Strange and wonderful beings who had changed his understanding of the universe. He met Lieutenant Reyes again, now promoted to commander, and they became something like friends, sharing meals and conversations about the nature of courage and sacrifice. He corresponded with Admiral Holloway, who had retired from active service to spend more time with her daughter, and she sent him photographs of her garden, where she grew flowers as a way of healing from the weight of command. And he wrote letters to the Galactic Collective, trying to explain what he was learning about humanity, though he suspected his words could never fully capture the truth. The cosmos trembles, he wrote in his final report, because humanity has announced its presence not with diplomacy or trade, but with fire and determination and love. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the most advanced, nor the most numerous, but they may be the most dangerous, something that cannot be quantified or predicted or defended against. They have each other, and they will burn the universe to ash before they let anyone take that away. He set down his writing instrument and looked out the window of his small apartment, watching the humans below going about their daily lives, laughing and arguing and loving and grieving. The cosmos trembled because of what they could do when threatened. But Velthos Kiron had learned to love them for what they were when at peace, complicated and contradictory and beautiful in their imperfection. And he knew that he would spend the rest of his very long life trying to help the galaxy understand the same truth. That humans were not to be feared for their capacity for violence. They were to be cherished for their capacity for love. And perhaps, in the end, those two things were not so different after all.